My name is Manel Sort. I've been in the games industry since the late 90s. I released 67 games to the market. I got several worldwide hits, top 10 and top 1 in my career in all the major platforms. That's PC, console, and mobile phones. And throughout these years, I've also lived all the major transitions of the video games industry. I had the pleasure to co-found Games for a Living with many people, many great talent, including Trip Hawkins, the founder of Electronic Arts. And together we've been thinking very carefully about what's the future of gaming, what comes next. And that has to do with luxury and has to do with the new generations. So let's get started. First of all, I've put this graph here with a lot of intent. There is no numbers, so you don't really know what it is right now. But I can tell you that there is a challenge in the industry. And the challenge that we can see from a strategic standpoint has to do with the first part. It says endless. So throughout the evolution of video games, in the last stage in development, especially when we're going back to around 2009, 2010, we started creating a new generation of video games that were endless. That means that they were games that you could start, but as soon as there was content, they will never end. Those games were now called games as a service, and it's the main type of video game in the market. When we look at the graph at the top, actually what you will realize is that when the graph starts to ramp up, that's the number of video games released per year. What happened is that as soon as the revolution of endless games started, in the premium games, the game that made the most was Grand Theft Auto, and that was about 9 billion. With free-to-play games, we reached up to 30 billion plus in revenues for video games. So a lot of new projects were started to the point where we are now. This year, close to 200,000 video games will go into the market, out of which that means that it's a pipeline of probably around, will be 1 million video games started, 200,000 make it to the market, and they have to compete with all the previous ones because they are endless. So that's the challenge the video games industry is going through, because it makes games disposable. Today, between today and tomorrow, a total of 3 video games with budgets of more than $50 million will be released, and many of you won't even know that they exist. Games with budgets from $5 to $50 million, 50, it's going to be about 15 released today. Not to say anything that goes below $5 million. So you can imagine that this is a huge challenge for the industry. Now, there is another industry in parallel, has nothing to do with video games right now, and that's the luxury industry. When we look at the luxury industry, it's built on top of 3 core timeless principles. So first of all, let's think about what's a luxury item. Luxury item, it's not an item that gives you a higher utility. If you think about a car, a very luxurious car, it's very likely that you're going to get something that has higher running costs. It can be even way more comfortable, very noisy. It consumes a lot of petrol. It's even hard to drive. Yet people are willing to pay a really high premium on top of the normal price. And that is luxury. Luxury has nothing to do with utility, and that's very important to understand. So the principles of luxury are basically 3. The first one is you want rarity. You don't want that to be accessible to everyone. So when you think about, for example, a Ferrari, some editions are limited, and that will be limited to who can access to that good. The other part that you have in anything that has to do with luxury, and it's very important, is the authenticity. So you need those items to be really well crafted. You need the level of attention put in whatever it's crafted. It needs to be a piece of art on itself, and that's very important. And then finally, you also have all the part of narrative. You need a story around this really precious luxury item. So think of, for example, in the case of Chanel, there was the purses that a woman back in the time used to hold with 2 hands. And she had the idea to put a band so that they will be on the side. And that was a whole movement of freedom for a woman in the world, because they could then express themselves in both hands on events. And those stories are also part of luxury. So we've talked about the situation of the video games industry. We talked a bit about the luxury industry. And something really important is that the luxury industry, which is 500 billion, video games is 200 billion per year, it's going through a difficult time. And that is because the new generations don't connect with the luxury items in the way that previous generations did. They are way more digital, and they're looking for new experiences. So if we look into the intersection on both, that's where we think there's going to be a big change in the games industry. We have video games and we have luxury, the sector of luxury, and we think that mixing both will get luxury games as a service. And that will be a new type of products which will work and operate in a different way to the traditional games as we know it. And we think it's very needed because every time in the industry, I live many of the changes in the industry, and it's always, every once in a while, all the games are copycats of the same game. You need all the gamers, me as a gamer, we need new experiences, and big changes like this are very important. So we are explaining how to merge these worlds, how we are proceeding to merge these worlds. The first thing to understand is that it's very important that when you play a game, you want a casual fun experience. That's where you start, okay? And not everyone will then be willing to move all the way to the other side and experience luxury. It's optional, but they need to start with, we need to start with a really good game, and then over time, so those that want get the luxurious solution as well on top. So to put a practical example, I'll explain what we're working on. It's a game called Diamond Dreams. If you think about luxury and you look at the history of luxury, you'll realize that the top luxury item historically has been jewelry. That's the main representation of luxury. So in our case, for breaking and starting all this new revolution in games, we focus on luxury jewelry. The first thing that's needed, that's different to normal games, it's a marketplace. It's very important to have a marketplace because luxury starts with ownership. You need to have something because it's also linked to legacy. You want to have this item that then you can share with future generations. So when you have a store, we looked at lots of different ways to implement it. The first thing we found is that if you want to have an item that's owned by the player and it can be transferred to another player, to do that with the standard fiat transactions is extremely difficult, especially for video games, because video games are products worldwide played. So it's really difficult to manage. For that, we found that the new technologies like Web3, which actually bring the possibility to do player-to-player transactions with tokens, provided a really good solution. The other part that we found that was very interesting in terms of, initially, in terms of luxury, was the evolution of NFTs. So if you think about NFTs, when NFTs appeared, our art director is Emmy Nomini. He's one of the best digital artists in the world. And he created one NFT that was auctioned. It was a very masterpiece of art. It was auctioned and sold for more than $1 million. Okay, that was on the very early days of NFTs. What happened right after is that everyone figured out ways to make NFT creation and transaction cheaper. Because at the beginning, creating an NFT could be, at the peak point, maybe like $100 or more to create an NFT. So it created some rarity. If you remember the 3 principles of luxury I told you about before, rarity, you need all this authenticity, and you need the narrative. So rarity was spoiled by having so many NFTs in the market. When it comes to authenticity, as soon as everyone could craft an NFT at cost 0, you started having really poor quality items in the market. So authenticity faded away. And then all the narrative with all of these also faded away. So that's why, for example, in our case in the marketplace, we're creating a closed marketplace where you can only access if you are within our ecosystem. And within that marketplace, think like a city where you can buy a perfume, okay? You will go to the main street in a city and you'll see that there is Chanel there. It's a really luxurious store with an extra premium on that. So we'll have all of that also embedded in our marketplace. And that will enable luxury, which is one of the things that, unfortunately, on the first iteration of ownership was lost. Now, back to this point, I remember when we crafted the first, our idea I was in the revolution from premium games to free-to-play games, and on all of us who worked on the first generation, our vision was very clear. If you make a game free, more people are going to play it. And if you allow those who want to pay as much as they want, that will compensate for having more people playing. And we know that any game that we create, there are 2 parameters that will make it successful. The first one is how social the game it is, and the other one is how accessible the game is. So by creating, especially like we first had like these browser games and then mobile games that were really accessible, but we also created what was called social games because we created a lot of social mechanics around it. Now, when it came to the payment, it was very important that free-to-play players will be able to play with premium players that will pay. Here is the same. It's super important, this equilibrium. I cannot emphasize this more. It's going to be one of the key success areas for this new model, so that everyone can play together and can enjoy these new generations of games together. Then regarding the items, I put here one of these really nice crafted items from Javier, our art director, which is, as I told you, is the world expert in virtual jewelry. If you go to any of the luxury stores in the mall, like Tiffany's or so, it's very likely that you see a lot of his artwork there. Players in these games are going to be crafting these really amazing pieces of art. And they'll be crafting them with their friends and with challenges together and putting a lot of effort and time into those. All of that will be embedded in the item itself. You'll be able to see how much time and effort went and all the adventures of getting to craft these pieces of jewelry. They will be owned by the players, and they will be able to move those ownership that they have on these items to their future generations. Okay? So we're going to be working really carefully on supply, demand, and the history of anything that is there. So that as time goes by, as society understands, and especially the new generations, and I'll get into that pretty soon, understand the value of this new craftsmanship, ownership that's digital, we can see then cultural artifacts as we've seen with physical items as time goes by. So finally, I put, to close, I have here some examples of the craftsmanship that the art team can create at Games for a Living and what's to expect in video games. As you can see, it's a bit more of a luxury step forward rather than what you've seen in the past in video games. And what we're going to have is these communities crafting these items, owning them, and being able to trade them in a way that's very luxurious, very different to what we've seen in the past. Also, the games have a way more luxurious look. So as soon as you turn them on, as I mentioned, like in our case, the first flagship title is going to be Diamond Dreams, based on the world of luxury. What we're doing is creating that special look that looks very different to a traditional game. It looks a lot more luxurious. So that I do believe it's going to be the key to get the new generations way more engaged in video games. It will be able to differentiate video games to what's coming, because I said that about 200,000 video games are going to be released this year, many of them with huge budgets. But think what's going to happen in 1 or 2 years with AI. What I've mentioned that's happening right now is just going to be to the extreme. We're going to have millions of games released per year. The whole video games industry will be so saturated that the margins will go down even more radically than they have been doing to date. And things like authenticity, making things that are really handcrafted, detailed, and then you can own and you can then transfer to future generations, if well executed, will be a core differentiator from AI-produced entertainment practices. And I do believe a lot of the video gaming community will appreciate that in the same way that they appreciated when we allowed them to play games for free in the last revolution. So thanks a lot for your time. It was a pleasure to have the opportunity to explain you what luxury video games are about. Thank you.